Very good morning to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I have some reflections to share, but more than that, I would like to hear what everybody else has to say. Unfortunately, I can't stay during the day today. I have many things today, but tomorrow I'll try to be here and see what comes out of it. Now, the way this is framed, the day resilience continuum, or you could look at its flip side, the risk continuum, from the everyday risk to the risks on a seasonal time scale, interannual time scale, decadal time scale, even longer time scale. How do we sort of work across all of this and come up with coherent strategies for building resilience of our societies? And the meeting really happens at a very critical time. I mean, this is one of the worst monsoon seasons we've had in the last 20 years in terms of disaster impacts. Just to give you, paint a picture of what we are dealing with this season. Mortality in just one of the states, in Bihar, is 514 deaths so far in the monsoon season. And the state of Bihar last year came up with a roadmap for implementation of Sendai framework, and they have committed themselves to reducing mortality by 75%. So out of that 75%, 75% reduction would mean, if you look at the numbers for the baseline years, would be that mortality over 10-year period should be 712 deaths. 514 have already occurred. So in the next 9 years, so anyway, I mean, I will not get into the details of measurement under the Sendai, but what I'm saying is that, it's going to be a huge challenge even to achieve the simplest, most straightforward target under the Sendai framework. To give you a scale of the problem, in Bihar, 1.7 crores, those of you who are more familiar with millions, 17 million people have been affected. And that's more than the population of 2/3 of the world's countries. There are 193 countries, 121 countries have more population than, less population than that. So in 2/3 of the countries in the world, a similar flood would require that you have to provide assistance to the entire country and perhaps evacuate half of them. So I mean, that is the kind of scale we are talking about. Urban floods, the previous presentation talked about urban floods. Mumbai was in the news, but there are other cities that have had floods. Bangalore had a big flood on the Independence Day, 15th of August. In a matter of 2 hours, they got rainfall, which is double of monthly rainfall for August. And August is the rainiest month. And they got, in 2 hours, double the rainfall of what they get over a month. And yet, if you look at the rainfall map of Bangalore and the spatial variation within a spread of 50 kilometers is 1:3. So you have one area which is 1/3 of the rainiest. So how do you sort of account for that? How do you sort of issue early warnings which are so locally specific that even a 50 kilometer by 50 kilometer grid is not going to be enough? So I mean, that's another thing. And by the way, let me go back to Bihar for a moment. So we've had the worst floods. There are some communities I visited that haven't seen the kind of floods we've had this year since 1975. I was talking to women there, and they said, well, I got married and came to this village after 1975, so I haven't seen this in my living in this part of the state. And yet, the rainfall, the aggregate seasonal rainfall over Bihar is deficit. It is below normal. It's slightly below normal, about 3 to 5% below normal. So this is what we're dealing with. Worst floods in a rainfall deficit year. Mumbai, it was much in the national, international news. I think it would be not correct to say that we haven't made any progress in Mumbai since the 2005 floods, because I think the city came back up on its feet very quickly after the floods. Yet, the extreme rainfall event of 2005 was 900 millimeters. Now we are having flooding in 350 millimeters. Which is not to say that nothing has happened, but why it's like, you're trying to go up using a down escalator. So, you're building risk at a much faster pace than you're building resilience. So you can have early warning systems, you can reclaim rivers, but if the urban development paradigm is such that it is building risks, they are going to precipitate disasters. So this is the kind of thing we are dealing with in the country. I just because I have to deliver a keynote, so I have in my notes there are 5 points which I think you might wish to consider when you deliberate over the next 2 days. My first point is that much greater emphasis on self-reliance of communities. I think for governments, for political people, it is very difficult to articulate that. It is very difficult to say that, look, you live in a floodplain, and you know that there will be flood every 5 years, and those 5-year floods could happen every year now. But for the first 24 hours, or 48 hours, or 72 hours, fix anything, and say that for that time, you are on your own. We cannot take care of 1.7 crore people, 17 million people. It's not possible, physically not possible. So, but to be sort of resilient for those 24, 48, 72 hours, what you need in the peacetime when there is no flood. So we need to make an investment when the flood is not there, before the flood. So that I think that increasing emphasis on self-reliance is something which have to be, I can't overemphasize it. Because what is it, let me illustrate that, since I talked about Bihar, let me illustrate that with an example. So if you have seen the map of Bihar and the river system in Bihar, you will see that Ganga, or the Ganges, flows from west to east, and it basically bisects the state into north and south. In general, I'm oversimplifying, north is flood, south is drought. All the rivers from Himalayas come, get into Ganges, and the south is general. Most of the droughts happen in the south. I mean, it's oversimplification, but that's, roughly it's all right. And in the north, there is a whole network of rivers. There's 3 major rivers. All the 3 major rivers have embankments. In one single river, there is an embankment of 75 km each side. Try monitoring that in the flood times. And there are people living inside the embankment. So like there is a river, embankment on this side, embankment on this side. But there are people who are living inside the embankment close to the river because that's where their village has been for hundreds of years. Over time, and then there are networks of rivers inside. Over time, what has happened is that, let's build roads. Let's build roads and bridges so that people don't have to use boats from one village to the other. And, it increases productivity, improves, connectivity and all of that. But all of those bridges have been built locally, not very good standard. It has compromised the drainage, increased the flood potential. I'm not even talking about the effect of embankments. I'm just talking about these small rural roads and bridges. And there's a whole generation that has grown up without knowing how to take care of a boat and how to row a boat. So when the flood happens and when the roads are of no use, the villages don't have boats. They have stopped using boats. So for that, you have to rely on NDRF. How many boats does NDRF have? 50, 100 boats. How many boats is the state responsible for that? Another 100 boats, 200 boats. How many people do you have to evacuate? At least 1 million. How can you do that? It is impossible. It is an impossible task. So I mean, I'm not trying to say that having built roads was a bad thing. I'm saying that a lot of the times development comes at a cost. And it compromises resilience in unexpected ways. And I think the least we can do is that we build systems which do not promise too much at the local level from a distance. We have to build self-reliance. That's my first point. The second point is, I think climate change or no climate change manifestation in a particular location, or no manifestation of climate change at the local level, we really have a huge gap in terms of what an efficient system can be and what the current system is. Just the efficiency of the systems, efficiency of service delivery. I mean, we have to go out of this, especially those of us who work on disasters, please, no heroics. No heroics. We cannot manage disasters on heroics. We have to, the success of, at least in my country, the success of disaster risk management system will be when we say that we had massive floods. This year we did not deploy the national disaster response force. That would be success. That would mean that systems at the local level work efficiently. Let me illustrate that with an example. So if you have, I talked about embankments. So if you have embankments, 75 kilometers on both sides of just one river out of a large number of rivers, and guess how we monitor how the embankments are doing in times of floods? We drive up and down them. In this day and age, we ought to be able to install sensors. We ought to have better systems to monitor the real-time performance of embankments. So huge gains, huge potential for just simple efficiency gains. Nothing too dramatic, nothing. Just judicious application of technology, maintaining, keeping our options open, being very careful about making hard investments in new infrastructure and the sort of knock-on effect it can have. So that's my second point. How can we sort of really diligently work on enhancing efficiency of our systems? The third point is taking information, knowledge, analytics to people. I think on that again, we have huge potential, but it is really not connecting. Again, I can give examples that in the case of floods, we have forecasts, daily forecasts, 6-hourly forecasts, which give you rainfall, which give you stream flow. Doesn't make any sense. We have to talk about what will it cause, what is the impact, likely impact, inundation forecast. I think this has been talked about so many times that it's almost boring to talk about it, but we have to do more of the boring stuff to get it right. And if we can't get the digital elevation models for some parts of the countries done where the morphology of the river is such that the rivers shift course, at least we can do some community-based calibration and connect the scientific knowledge to what is the sort of local understanding of risk. So taking information to people, I think when we talk about delivery of basic services, when we talk about delivery of relief, we have to also in the same breath talk about delivering information in a usable, understandable, actionable format. I think if there has to be at least as much accountability for non-delivery of good information as it is for the non-delivery of relief items. So I think that is something which is the third point. The fourth point I want to make is, this is particularly with regards to floods, but it could be true of other hazards as well. By the way, the information thing, there are good practices already. I think we've, going back to my third point, I think we have made big progress in reducing heat wave related mortality. And it's all about making information usable and reaching out to people. Like from more than 2,000 deaths in 2015, this year we've had 250. And in terms of the severity of heat waves, they haven't been any less than in 2015. So every year there's and it's just about that. It's just about information. There is no other magic wand which has reduced heat wave related deaths. My fourth point is that there is, this has been written about a lot in the literature. is that most hazards and climate itself, is both a resource and a hazard. But in that resource and hazard continuum, where is where is the sweet spot? On that I think we need to have much greater research. When I talked about the communities that live inside the embankments, that's a classic example of how, they are sort of banking on the resource side of the flood, the water, the sediment, the fertility of the soil, and sort of, willing to accept the hazard risk, which happens once in 10 years. So how would that change? And where is that, where is the sort of fine balance? And how would that balance shift over time? I think that is something we need to understand better. Like right now, I think in the floodplains, except in very, very few locations in some states, I have not heard of any discussion of resettling people. I mean, resettlement, relocating people is an explosive issue. It's a very complex issue. But can we live with that? Is that a given, or is it something we have to sort of question? And that can be only answered if you begin to look at this resource hazard continuum and see where is the sweet spot, what is it, where can we sort of find a sweet balance where, everything will be sustainable and people will be resilient. A corollary of that is that, in the papers also I saw there is a lot of discussion on diversifying your risks, get out of agriculture, do something else. I think those of us who work on disasters or climate change adaptation, are fond of talking about diversification of risk, but diversification comes at a certain opportunity cost. And somebody who has been, below the poverty line, so to speak, and has, because of sort of efficiencies of scales and lack of diversification, has been able to go above that. You can't say that, now you go a little bit suboptimal, but stable and suboptimal. I think we have to sort of understand the costs of diversification. What is the opportunity cost of diversification, particularly for the poor people? So I think that's my fourth point. My fifth and final point is that there is ample evidence. There are many examples, and we will see that in our country in the drought. It's just like there are already news reports saying that there are more than 200 districts, which is a third of the country, which is going to be affected by drought. So we will soon forget about floods and begin to deal with drought. But there is ample evidence that a lot of the impacts are because of maldevelopment or maladaptation. So if you have pursued a policy of growing sugarcane in semi-arid areas because there is irrigation now, there is canal irrigation now. It is very difficult to do that in the sort of formal policy realm, but think tanks such as yourselves, can we begin to talk about rollback of some of that maladaptation? What are the costs of rolling it back? Sort of de-develop the sort of maldevelopment that is happening. Is it possible? What kind of creativity can we exercise? What kind of imagination can we exercise in our governance systems to say that no, we don't have to be locked into something which is not working. So we can go back. It's like same is the case with the floods as well. There are instances where flooding has occurred because of some inappropriate development path we've taken. To what extent is it possible to sort of roll it back? What is the sort of what is the kind of governance arrangement? What is the kind of governance narrative we need to create to do that? Is it possible? Maybe it is not. So I think this is something worth considering and reflecting on. I think with that, Shri Kamal Kishore has ended his speech. Thank you.